So our next speaker, first in our order as it appears on the program, Maxine Evers. Law, always up to the challenge, new ways of student learning. Maxine is the Associate Dean for Education at UTS Law School, who have gone through a similar process, as we're about to find out, to what we are going through now. Maxine, thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much, Ben. I have to say, Des, thank you. I saw Des present on Second Life several years ago. So if you ever think about coming down to New South Wales, possibly a joint appointment here at UTS would be fantastic. So thank you for inviting me along to share the UTS law experience. And when Ben did his introduction, I must say it did bring back some memories of a time that we have been through. Possibly though, you may be further down the track than we were when we first rolled out our what we call BTVs, or balanced teaching periods. So what I have to talk about maybe
We're fine with acronyms here, it's great.
as opposed to SFS's, student feedback surveys. So what I might have to say could be disappointing. Some of you it could be delightful to some of you, but I can certainly reassure you that you will survive. And so if I can put it into the context of UTS, just a little, I don't know a lot about your implementation plan here at UNSW, and particularly here at the law school, but certainly our implementation plan for our balanced teaching periods isn't based on a tri-semester model. So we really are having still our main teaching sessions. We've gone from semesters to sessions in autumn and in spring, and summer is still optional. The thinking behind summer as optional was to provide students with an opportunity to either slow down if they were finding autumn and spring too heavy, or possibly to catch up if they had failed a subject. But it was really to, I suppose, to be agile and to provide some flexibility rather than, say, the true tri-semester model. And the second part of our balanced teaching periods and our changes with the structure of our academic calendar was we had a university-wide project called Learning Futures, because we are the University of Technology. And that was really a teaching and learning project that is continuing. We're into stage 2. We're at stage 1 in that period. That commenced in 2015, so the year before balanced teaching periods were introduced. And so that project really had an impact on our learning and teaching as well. So it is a little bit difficult for us to really identify and classify the work that we did in our assessments with whether it came out of Learning Futures or whether it came out of our balanced teaching periods. But let's see how we go. If we can go somewhere. So the 4 areas I'd like to touch on are course level, subject level, resources and support, and what I call the essentials. And as I said, perhaps with what Ben has said, you're already at some stage along the journey of course level and subject level. Certainly in relation to course level, now when I'm putting it to in the context of the filming of the perfect scenario, the utopia, not like the television show, where on the ground is not always that straightforward, and with the benefit of hindsight, which we can always do what we would have done differently, and I will try and highlight those along the way. So we did very similar to this law school, to your law school, we talk about with our students, and we embed and we integrate into our curriculum authentic assessment tasks. You've done that for a long, long time. We've done that for a long, long time. So, but we really did start to kind of unbundle what does it mean to be authentic? What does it really mean to be a practice-orientated law school? And that, of course, then comes along with the assessment. So your learning objectives, your learning strategies, your assessment criteria, your forms of feedback. So really the journey of the subject within the course. So I heard Ben refer to mapping, and that's certainly what we did. And again, reflecting, we could have spent more time in the lead up to the introduction of balanced teaching periods doing some mapping. I'm sure, like this law school, we've gone through different types of curriculum projects. From about 2011, we had a graduate attributes project, which has really been a core, and that was picked up after the law standards undergrad program that's done in the learning and teaching and Sally Kiff's work, and we took that up to do graduate attributes. So we had done mapping along the way, difference between undergrad and postgrad, but we were really trying to do it in a little bit more detail. So I put the what is the assessment task, how are we going to deliver our learning to our students, where are we going to do it, either face-to-face or online, and very much what we talked about, I suppose, a response to our shorter sessions was the expectation / requirement that students would prepare. To make full and frank disclosure, I don't think we've been 100% successful with students preparing. Maybe they're too busy trying to work out how they can cheat in multiple choice quizzes. But it was really much, and you'll hear our Deputy Vice Chancellor for Education and students talk about this, she wants to get students to come onto campus to do things that are worthwhile that they couldn't do at home in their own independent study periods. So they're the type of questions that we asked. Feedback, and you might think this is probably getting a little bit too trite, a little bit too babyish when we're talking about university students, law students as adult learners, but even having conversations with subjects that are being offered in the same session, if students do follow the suggested progression, which we know many students don't, about what are due dates for assessments, because as you know, one of the concerns from students is they've got so many assignments due, and usually they're significant assignments towards the end of the session due at the same time. We've done that, and we've done that for a long time in our practical legal training program, and I know you're introducing a PLT program for next year, but of course it's easier to do when you've got a smaller course. But if you did have the ability to just really plan about those dates, because students, as we know, do become fixated on when assignments are due and they have to fit around all their other commitments. One thing that we did focus on, and might have been a bit of a byproduct of the introduction of balanced teaching periods, but worked well, and I would have loved to have seen more of this, and we are still continuing it to some extent, is really trying to have that narrative around the course in subjects, particularly of course it fits very well into the core subjects, the pre-C11 subjects, of what students should have learnt, should have remembered, and should have brought with them in contract, say, into either real property or corporate law or commercial law, etc. So having conversations with other teaching teams, we have core teaching teams at UTS, about where the students should be up to, continuing that conversation in the current subject, and then guiding the students as to what they will learn to add to that knowledge in further subjects. So I know we all design our pre-C11 a little bit differently, but what we did is really try and have that focus on their prior and future learning, and even to the extent that some subject coordinators had really done some mapping for students so they could see what they learn in this subject, but what they will pick up in further subjects, and what they should have brought with them from an earlier subject. And this is something that we're still grappling with, is that idea of communicating to students and really getting some, I suppose, ownership or responsibility from students that they are partners in their learning. And one of the, I suppose, separate to but parallel to what we've done during this time, I spoke about it at the Legal Education Research Conference here in December, was Student Staff Consultative Committee. So students have told us that they really enjoy options in assessments, so that they have some choice about where their strengths are and what they would like to do. So very much about having that buy-in from students. And if I reflecting on what we could have done better as a university, and this has certainly been acknowledged by our provost, is our communication strategy and operational directions to students about what the balanced teaching period meant for them. So we haven't achieved universal buy-in from students around what it means to come to class, to be prepared, and to really maximise the value of having the teacher either in the room or in the virtual room or in an online subject or course. We do have a couple of online courses at UTS. So So it's very much about what does it mean to be authentic, how do we thread our assessments through all our courses, and really how do we emphasise to students the value they will take away in being well prepared. I see I come from the University of Technology.
You have to point it at the projector.
Oh.
Point it at the projector.
So Ben again asked a question, and it sounds like you have already thought about this and discussed it and may continue to do so, particularly this afternoon. But we did ask that question, do we over-assess? And it's not, as you know, a trite question. It's not about making subjects or courses easier for students. It really is thinking long and hard and deep about what's the value of assessment, and particularly here this in the core subjects, and we have 8 credit point core subjects and 6 credit point core subjects. Just about, there is so much content for students to take on board. But I think the longer we are in academia, certainly from my perspective, we do understand that students are not going to necessarily, or not going to remember that content. That content is going to change, again, as we know. So it's really very much about, I don't have to tell you this, about how they apply the content, the skills that they use, etc. So it is taking it back to that very basic question. And what we try to do as part of our Learning Futures project is really focus, a bit like the AQF, on what are the outcomes that we want our students to take away from that subject. What do we want them to know? What do we want them to be able to do with what they know? And then design the assessment tasks around that. To very much, as I've already indicated, maximise that learning experience in class. We introduced, as part of Learning Futures, the early low stakes assessment. So that's really to give something we've been doing in first year, particularly our first year Foundations of Law, first semester or first session subject, for some time, but giving students that ability to get some feedback either for no marks or say 5 to 10% of marks, so that they did have some idea as to how they were going, where they needed to improve, and particularly where they could get help if they need to do so. And again, this is an ongoing project, and I'm sure you're in the same position as we are about reviewing approaches to feedback. And coming away, stepping back from that idea that feedback has to be generated from the teacher. So really trying to work on what's peer feedback look like, what does self-feedback, self-reflection reviewing look like, and one of our graduate attributes is self-management. We have 6, that's one of 6. So we're really trying to encourage students when we are embedding the graduate attribute of self-management in identified subjects. What does that mean to be able to step back and to look at their own work and to be able to critically analyse their work. And we have got some of our colleagues, or a couple of our colleagues in the law faculty, doing oral feedback to students. And I think that has a lot of benefit around really summarising the feedback, both the good and the bad, and the area of improvement that students may well focus on by taking it on board in that form. When we were looking at our assessments, as I said, working back from the learning outcomes, and they may have been small things at the time, but they did make a difference. So in terms of some of our assessment tasks, might have had Part A, Part B and Part C. And when we looked at it with fresh eyes, you could see that Part A and Part B were pretty much assessing the same outcomes. One was longer than the other. So it wasn't necessary that we have those 2 assessments. Yes, we certainly have to scaffold assessments, but sometimes it's a duplication rather than a scaffolding, asking ourselves what was the benefit. We've cut one in our criminal law subject. We've introduced some students being assessed by using beavers, and we have thought across the university, and it probably been a little bit of further deliberation in the law faculty about the value of exams and whether we need to have the formal exams in every subject. I haven't done an exact calculation of our core subjects, it would still be very much the majority of those course subjects would have exams. The maximum weighting of those exams would be up to 50%. But there are a few course subjects that don't have exams and have gone back to what we talk about as that authentic assessment. Resources and support, never enough of both of those. And again, I might be sharing with you our experience that you are already very much aware of, and hopefully have been able to secure both the resources and support. And this is really with the benefit of looking back. Certainly our experience was it could have been a more positive experience, particularly for academics, around acknowledgement of the increased workload, acknowledgement of the uncertainty of what the balanced teaching period was going to end up looking like, acknowledgement of particularly the classroom tutors being at the coalface of hearing students' concerns about the balanced teaching period. And whilst as a faculty we acknowledge that we thought as best we could, I think, and some of you would have colleagues and friends from UTS Law, and I'm sure that they will share that with you, that it was a time of uncertainty to some extent, and it was a time I think that acknowledgement could have been rolled out a little bit more. Funding, again, as a university, we all know the challenges with funding. So where the funding did assist, and that didn't come straight away, so I think senior management of the university was really taking on board, and I don't know which lines of communication I like with your university senior management, but it was certainly about getting some funding just to take, and Jez's subject is a really good example of the time. We're not that sophisticated, but at the type of work that we've all acknowledged goes into the preparation of that subject. So we introduced from the university supplied writers with learning technologists that were really there to help particularly people, say, of my era that were not that technically savvy, even though I'm working at the University of Technology, and to assist us with doing some of that work around flipping our classroom, about encouraging students to prepare, about making it a positive, interesting student experience. And then within the faculty, but paid by the university, were our learning and teaching adjuncts, which were really a great resource because they were law academics, they were our casual staff usually, the majority of them were, so they knew the language, they knew the environment, and they would be doing work, the luxury that we know as integrated academics we don't have the time to do. So they would be doing things like designing criteria, drafting quizzes and answers, doing short answer, working on, we have Blackboard, working on UTS Online to create some really interesting sites, doing some hunting around for different resources, etc. That funding for the adjuncts was for last year and hasn't continued to this year. For learning and teaching, but they were great. The other area, I suppose, which again, thinking back, we could have made more opportunity around was the professional development. Sitting here, you've been working this afternoon, I've taken on professional development, you're probably thinking that's maybe on your assessment, that's maybe not professional development, but certainly as part of our Learning Futures project, some of our learning and teaching, particularly academics, took on the role of peer reviewing subject outlines from other faculties. And we really did see as an opportunity for them to develop some expertise in learning and teaching, not necessarily law, and then this is part of the Learning Futures project. This year we are concentrating on peer review. So we don't hear a lot about professional development necessarily, but I thought it was one aspect that you might want to take on a bit further and think about. So in summary, the essentials. Communication. That, I believe, to speak frankly, was our biggest downfall. The university not communicating as well as it could be. They certainly did communicate, but not communicating as well as it could be about what would the changes mean for students, and what will the changes mean for staff, and putting it into context, highlighting the positives. And one of the positives that we haven't yet quantified that I think is worthwhile doing is, from an academics perspective, it's because we have our shorter sessions now, but they're balanced. We've previously taught in summer, and law has taught in summer for quite a long time, electives at UTS. We've got 12 teaching weeks, autumn, spring and summer. But the way that the calendar has been organised, if you're not a subject coordinator, you could finish your teaching duties about the end of October. And then again, if you were not a subject coordinator of a large subject, you're not starting teaching until I think we came back on the 12th of March. So that's a good break, and we only get 4 weeks holiday a year. So it is an opportunity for academics to do their non-teaching work, as we all know usually translates to the R word. And so it does give them a little bit more of time, a bigger chunk of time to do that work that otherwise we didn't have, because we were teaching longer into November, and we were also teaching earlier into the really beginning of March, the end of February. It's not the case, obviously, if you're a subject coordinator, because you have those responsibilities, as you know, and I think either as Des or Ben pointed out, we have some real problems with turning around the marking. And so identifying benefits and really communicating those well. I don't think we can over-communicate. Well, our experience was that we couldn't have over-communicated. The number of students that said, I didn't know anything about the balanced teaching periods, they call it the trimester, after it had been implemented for a period of time, but also staff. And another area that you might not have here at UNSW, and I'm not quite sure how it happened, but the way that the balanced teaching periods really impacted on casuals. So we have a reasonably significant casual academic contingent in our law courses, and somehow, probably do a PhD on it, somehow the casuals kind of got caught in the middle of the implementation of the balanced teaching periods, because it was rumoured that they were saying, we've lost all this work, we're going to lose our jobs, we're not being paid as much now, we're expected to do more work, but it's not recognised, etc. They also were often at the brunt of having responses, negative responses from students, etc. And I really think it did have an impact on our casual workforce, and that also then translated to our academics as well. So, and I know you do value your sessional staff here, as we do at UTS, and I just think it's important to keep them in mind as well, so to take them on the journey as much as you can. We can't always pay them for every piece of work, and we can't always have them working with us, and we recognise that, of course, but as trying to keep them in the loop, because I don't think we did that very well, and they are, as I said, a very important part, as are our students and as are our professional staff, because they could be impacted as well. So really it is, just my final point, if you're going to learn something from our experience, it is around that clear, constant communication to both academics, professional staff and students as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Maxine. Some eerie and uncanny similarities between our
Yes.
institutions on the level of academics and institutional communication. Question time. Does anybody want to kick us off? Surely.
I just wondered if you had some tips for managing the turnaround of assessment challenge, and what did it do in terms of reshaping what assessment looked like, and what more specific?
Certainly we started to engage people as markers, so casual staff that were teaching into the program, and we're talking really about our core subjects and those last piece of assessments, which sometimes is an exam but might be something else. So casuals came in to help mark, and that does bring additional work, as you know, preparing marking guides, etc., to turn it around quickly. In terms of professional staff, we did have to have some flexibility. We had to say to the university, I'm sorry, we're just not going to get the results in on the date that you're given us, but we always know that there's a little bit of room to move. That date's not the very final date, and whereas we were always very good as lawyers at complying, we just had to push back some of those dates. Looking at different ways of assessing, bringing assignments due dates a little bit earlier. Then of course then has a question, what do students do if they know it's not for assessment? Trying not to load all the weight of the assessments at the very end. Perhaps having something like 20, 40, 40, rather than say 10, 20 and 70 or whatever. And we introduced multiple choice quizzes and other simple, brief ways of marking, but they did not replace our kind of final pieces of assessment.
Andrew.
Thanks, Maxine. My question follows on from Julie's in this idea of turnaround, and I'm curious to learn a bit more about the impact on students who are struggling, so students who are registered with the Disability Service, and also students who fail and then have to sit supplementaries and so on. Can you give us a bit of the experience of them?
Good, thanks, Andrew. If you have a look on, say, our academic calendar on the website, you can see it is a really tight period. So we've shortened our formal exam period, so I think we run 3, if not 4 sessions of exams starting early in the morning and going through to the night, and that's been difficult for students. So we've squeezed the formal period into a shorter time, so then that we've been able to then move up closer to that rescheduled exams, alternative exams, etc. So it has been difficult. I don't have the stats, but I'm quite confident in saying there are more students that will be placed on the W or withheld pending the final outcome. We've just had to live with that, which does mean then a little bit of ongoing follow-up whether the students are not left forever on a W. And we would have a more generous approach, and certainly for the director students would take a more generous approach to possibly waiving prerequisites for subjects where the results weren't finalised and students are moving into another subject that requires the prior learning of that. We're very lucky, as I'm sure you are here, to have very good professional staff, and so they've taken a little bit of the admin work around that to do. We used to have results ratification committee, which was a formal committee where all the results had to be in. We would look at the spread, we would look at how many students have unusual marks, etc. We've disbanded the formality of that review. We still have it, but to give us a little bit more time, it's a bit more ad hoc. So we've had a lot of workarounds.
I might just squeeze a quick question in. You mentioned before your use of an oral examination, a BEVA. Is that a kind of a one-on-one or more a collective tutorial style one? Is it a standalone form of assessment, or does it follow after, is there a BEVA on the basis of an essay, for example?
I'm not sure then, because I'm not being directly involved. It's being done by some of our bright new academics in criminal law, and I think it's certainly a one-on-one, but not being accepted across because of the burden of how you do that. But certainly oral feedback has been started by that academic, but it's also been picked up by a couple of other academics. So they're using Blackboard to do, I think it's Blackboard, as I said, that's our provider, our platform, to give oral feedback, and as well as formal feedback. One challenge that we are grappling with at UTS at the moment, you maybe have already established that, and same with QUT, we might be a little bit behind the eight ball in technology, is about online submissions and online marking and feedback. That's not the norm in our faculty, and academics that do use, and we predominantly use Turnitin, I do find it's good once they get into the rhythm of it, but certainly in terms of trying to minimise the time for feedback, that's where we're hoping academics can really save some time, but still give quality feedback to students.
Okay, last question, Andy.
Thank you, Maxine. Hi. I just wanted to ask you, it might be too premature, but are you in a position to say what really has worked or what you absolutely should be dropping completely?
Yes, that's a really good question. I really believe that the opportunity that came about by changing our academic calendar did allow us to review and refresh our subjects and at our course level. As I said, it's not utopia though. I would have loved to have seen more of those discussions amongst subjects, etc. And I think that did work really well. And again, sometimes it's disappointing to know with students. And you know, I will look at subject outlines. I think, wow, I would love to do that subject. Even some Presley 11. And sometimes students don't share that joy. As I said, they're concentrating on the assessments are due, etc. But I do think the work that we put in does tell a good story about a student's learning. And again, as you are here at UNSW, it's even just reviewing, you know, authentic assessment tasks. So is, you know, a submission as much value now as maybe writing a policy document, all those type of questions. What might have been a good authentic assessment maybe 8 years ago might not be that now. What are different ways it's happening in the profession and beyond that students will be doing when they go into practice. What didn't work, hasn't worked, is the idea that when we rolled out the balanced teaching periods, and it might be different with you, is our first week was orientation and preparation, O&P. It wasn't a cruise, believe you me. It was very much about expecting the students to come to prepare at home or wherever, and then come onto campus in week 2 and be ready to hit the ground running, and not ask those questions unless they didn't understand something that they would have covered in week 1. That hasn't worked so well. So the university has taken a little bit of a variation to our balanced teaching periods, and whereas it was mandated initially that no student come onto campus in week 1 when balanced teaching periods was introduced in 2016. Well, they didn't have security guards. They come on to go to the cafe, to the library, all the student services. You just weren't allowed into a classroom, or you weren't allowed to Blackboard Online. You know, you were. We wanted you to go to Blackboard Online. Week 1, orientation and preparation, not just for first years. The university, as I said, has put a little bit of a variance on that week 1 is optional, either face-to-face or online. And again, it was up to faculties to determine which way they would go. For example, science decided that they would bring students onto campus in week 1 to do the work about risk management and preparation if they're doing laboratory work, etc. Some faculties that really have high numbers of students that might need some non-English speaking students that might need some language support, they got them onto campus to do the appellate test. In law, we have been agile, flexible and disruptive and innovative, and we have said to our academics, matter for you. So some subjects have face-to-face in week 1 and some subjects don't. But certainly from the student's perspective, they are meant to be doing work in week 1. So as I said, when they come into week 2, they're ready to start working. So really all the university said now about week 1, you cannot examine a student in week 1. And how do you define preparation and introductory work?